Utility pole cross members can be installed over private property in most cases. However, there are certain restrictions and requirements that must be met. The utility company must obtain an easement or right-of-way from the property owner before installing the cross member. The cross member must be installed in accordance with the easement or right-of-way. The cross member must not interfere with the use and enjoyment of the property. The distance that cross members can extend outward from the pole varies depending on the local regulations and the specific utility company. Generally, cross members are allowed to extend up to 6 feet in residential areas and 10 feet in commercial and industrial areas. Some building codes may restrict the installation of utility poles and cross members in certain locations, such as near power lines or traffic signals. It is important to contact the local utility company and municipality to determine the specific requirements and restrictions before installing a utility pole cross member. If you have concerns about the installation of a cross member over your property, you should contact the utility company and/or the municipality. Firstly, easements are legal rights granted to a utility company to access and use a portion of private property for specific purposes, such as installing and maintaining utility infrastructure like poles and cross members. These easements are typically recorded with the local land records and become part of the property's legal description. When a utility company seeks to install a utility pole or cross member on private property, they must first obtain an easement from the property owner. This involves negotiating the terms of the easement, including the location of the pole or cross member, the scope of the utility company's access rights, and any compensation to be paid to the property owner. The easement agreement should clearly define the utility company's rights and responsibilities with respect to the property. Secondly, right-of-way is a similar concept to an easement, but it typically refers to a strip of land that is dedicated to public use, such as for roads, highways, or utility lines. Utility companies may also obtain rights-of-way over private property to install and maintain their infrastructure. Like easements, rights-of-way are typically recorded with the local land records and become part of the property's legal description. When a utility company seeks to install a utility pole or cross member within a right-of-way, they must comply with the terms of the right-of-way agreement. This may include restrictions on the location of the pole or cross member, the type of construction materials used, and the maintenance activities that can be performed. Thirdly, local regulations and the specific utility company's policies play a significant role in determining the allowable extension of cross members. These regulations are designed to ensure public safety, maintain reliable utility service, and minimize the impact of utility infrastructure on the surrounding environment. The National Electrical Safety Code, NESC, provides guidelines for the safe installation and maintenance of electrical power and communication systems. While the NESC does not specify the exact distance that cross members can extend outward from a pole, it does address issues such as clearance from buildings, other structures, and the ground. Local jurisdictions may adopt the NESC as part of their building codes or electrical codes. In addition to the NESC, local regulations may impose additional restrictions on the extension of cross members. For example, some jurisdictions may have setback requirements that prohibit cross members from extending over property lines or sidewalks. Utility companies themselves may also have internal policies that limit the extension of cross members, based on factors such as the type of equipment being supported, the voltage of the power lines, and the presence of other utilities. Fourthly, residential areas typically have stricter regulations regarding the extension of cross members than commercial or industrial areas. This is because residential areas tend to have higher population densities, narrower streets, and more landscaping. In residential areas, cross members are generally allowed to extend up to 6 feet from the pole. This limit is intended to minimize the visual impact of utility infrastructure, prevent obstructions to pedestrian and vehicle traffic, and ensure that residents have adequate space for landscaping and other outdoor activities. The 6-foot limit may also be influenced by the need to maintain safe clearances from buildings, trees, and other structures. Fifthly, commercial and industrial areas typically have less restrictive regulations regarding the extension of cross members than residential areas. This is because commercial and industrial areas tend to have lower population densities, wider streets, and less landscaping. In commercial and industrial areas, cross members are generally allowed to extend up to 10 feet from the pole. This higher limit is intended to accommodate the greater demands of commercial and industrial customers, such as the need for larger transformers, more power lines, and specialized communication equipment. The 10-foot limit may also be influenced by the need to maintain adequate clearances from loading docks, parking areas, and other commercial or industrial facilities. Sixthly, building codes and electrical codes are comprehensive sets of regulations that govern the design, construction, and maintenance of buildings and electrical systems. These codes are typically adopted by local jurisdictions and enforced by building inspectors and electrical inspectors. Building codes may address issues such as the structural integrity of utility poles, the fire resistance of cross members, and the accessibility of utility equipment. Electrical codes such as the National Electrical Code (NEC) address issues such as the safe wiring of electrical systems, the grounding of equipment, and the protection of circuits from overcurrents. The NEC contains specific requirements for the installation of overhead conductors, including clearance requirements, conductor size requirements, and insulation requirements. Building codes and electrical codes may also restrict the installation of utility poles and cross members in certain locations, such as near power lines, traffic signals, or other sensitive areas. These restrictions are intended to prevent hazards, ensure the reliability of utility service, and protect public safety. Seventhly, power lines are electrical conductors that carry high-voltage electricity from generating stations to substations and then to homes, businesses, and other customers. Power lines can be either overhead or underground, but overhead power lines are more common in many areas. Overhead power lines are typically supported by utility poles and cross members. The installation and maintenance of power lines are subject to strict regulations, including clearance requirements, conductor size requirements, and insulation requirements. These regulations are intended to prevent electrical shock, fire hazards, and other dangers. Building codes and electrical codes may restrict the installation of utility poles and cross members near power lines to prevent interference and ensure safety. For example, utility poles may be required to be located a certain distance away from power lines to prevent accidental contact. Cross members may be required to be made of non-conductive materials to prevent electrical current from flowing through them. Eighthly, traffic signals are devices that control the flow of traffic at intersections and other locations. Traffic signals typically consist of a set of colored lights that indicate when vehicles and pedestrians are allowed to proceed. The installation and maintenance of traffic signals are subject to strict regulations, including timing requirements, visibility requirements, and maintenance requirements. These regulations are intended to ensure the safe and efficient flow of traffic. Building codes and electrical codes may restrict the installation of utility poles and cross members near traffic signals to prevent obstructions and ensure visibility. For example, utility poles may be required to be located a certain distance away from traffic signals to prevent them from blocking the view of the lights. Cross members may be required to be painted a certain color to make them more visible to drivers and pedestrians. Ninthly, local utility companies are responsible for providing electricity, natural gas, water, and other utility services to customers within their service areas. Utility companies are typically regulated by state or local governments to ensure that they provide safe, reliable, and affordable services. Utility companies are responsible for the installation, maintenance, and repair of their utility infrastructure, including utility poles, cross members, power lines, and pipelines. Utility companies are also responsible for obtaining easements and rights of way from property owners to install and maintain their infrastructure. If you have questions or concerns about the installation of a utility pole or cross member on your property, you should contact your local utility company. The utility company can provide you with information about their policies and procedures, as well as any applicable regulations. Tenthly, municipalities are local governments that are responsible for providing services to residents within their jurisdictions. Municipalities typically have building codes, electrical codes, and zoning regulations that govern the installation of utility infrastructure. Municipalities also have building inspectors and electrical inspectors who enforce these codes and regulations. If you have questions or concerns about the installation of a utility pole or cross-member on your property, you should contact your local municipality. The municipality can provide you with information about their codes and regulations, as well as any applicable permits. In summary, the installation of utility pole cross-members over private property is generally allowed, but it is subject to certain restrictions and requirements. These restrictions and requirements are intended to protect property rights, ensure public safety, and maintain reliable utility service. Before installing a utility pole cross-member on your property, it is important to contact your local utility company and municipality to determine the specific requirements and restrictions.